The afternoon sun filled Victoria Hayes's luxury penthouse with warm light. Through the enormous glass windows, London stretched beneath them. Victoria stood beside a professional pool table, dressed in a sharp cream blazer and black trousers. Across from her stood Daniel Carter. Daniel was a single father in his early 30s. He worked as an operations manager at Victoria's company. Unlike most employees, Daniel wasn't afraid to disagree with her. That was exactly why she had invited him upstairs. "You think my plan will fail?" Victoria asked. Daniel nodded calmly. "I think you're ignoring what the customers actually want." Victoria folded her arms. "Everyone else approved it. Everyone else works for you." Victoria stared at him. Then she smiled. "You're becoming very confident." "I'm just being honest." Victoria picked up a pool cue. "Let's settle it another way." Daniel looked at the table. "You're challenging me to pool?" "Exactly. I thought we were discussing business." "We are." She placed the cue ball on the table. "But I think you're more competitive than you admit." Daniel laughed. "What's the bet?" Victoria's eyes sparkled. "If I win, you admit my business plan is right. And if I win, I admit you're right." Daniel nodded. "Fair enough." Victoria leaned over the table. Then she stopped and looked at him. "Actually, let's make it interesting." Daniel immediately became cautious. "How?" Victoria smiled. "If I sink this shot, you owe me a kiss." Daniel blinked. "A kiss?" "Yes." "You're the CO." "I know. And this is your idea of negotiation?" Victoria laughed. "Are you scared?" Daniel picked up his cue. "No." "Good." She pointed toward the table. "Then you accept?" Daniel smiled. "Fine." Victoria positioned the cue ball. The room became quiet. She took her shot. The cue ball struck the target perfectly. The colored ball rolled toward the pocket. Daniel watched it closely. For a second, it looked like Victoria had won. Then the ball touched the edge of the pocket. It bounced away. Victoria straightened. Daniel grinned. "You missed." Victoria frowned. The table moved. Daniel laughed. "Of course it did." She pointed the cue at him. "Don't celebrate yet." Daniel stepped toward the table. "My turn." He studied the arrangement. He didn't rush. His father had taught him to play pool when he was a teenager. "Always think 2 shots ahead," his father used to say. Daniel took the shot. The ball rolled across the table. It struck another ball. The second ball dropped cleanly into the pocket. Victoria's eyebrows lifted. Beginner's luck. Daniel took another shot. Another ball disappeared. Victoria stared at him. "You're actually good." "Good enough." Daniel continued. Victoria watched every move. She was used to controlling meetings, negotiations, and entire companies. But Daniel wasn't impressed by any of that. He simply focused on the game. Then his phone rang. Daniel checked the screen. His expression immediately softened. "Emily." He answered. "Hi, sweetheart." Victoria quietly watched him. Daniel listened. "Your art project?" He smiled. "Don't worry. I'll be there." He ended the call. Victoria asked, "Everything okay?" She forgot her art folder at school. "That's why you're leaving?" "She's 6. Daniel smiled. At 6, forgetting an art folder is basically a national emergency. Victoria laughed. "I understand." Daniel picked up his jacket. "I should go." Victoria looked toward the clock. "You've still got time." Not enough to risk being late. He started toward the elevator. Victoria suddenly called his name. "Daniel." He turned. She held out her car keys. "Take my car." He looked surprised. "No, I'll be fine. It's faster. I don't want to inconvenience you." Victoria smiled. "You're not." Daniel hesitated before taking the keys. "Thank you." "You're welcome." The elevator doors opened. Before Daniel stepped inside, Victoria smiled. "You still owe me a kiss." Daniel laughed. "Only if you sink the shot." The doors closed. Victoria stood there smiling. For some reason, she couldn't stop thinking about his answer. The following morning, Daniel arrived at the office early. He expected another normal workday. Instead, Victoria was waiting outside his office. She was holding 2 coffees. "Good morning." Daniel looked at the coffee. You remember my order? I remember important things. He accepted it. Thanks. Victoria smiled. About yesterday. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The pool? Yes. You still haven't won. I know. She leaned against his office door, which is why we're having a rematch. Daniel laughed. When? Friday. You're serious? Very. Daniel shook his head. You really don't like losing. Victoria smiled. Not when the prize is worth winning. Daniel looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victoria walked away. Daniel watched her disappear down the corridor. He couldn't explain why, but something about her had changed. She wasn't simply trying to prove herself anymore. She seemed genuinely interested in him. Friday afternoon arrived quickly. Victoria's penthouse was brighter than ever. Sunlight poured across the pool table. The city outside was busy beneath a clear blue sky. Daniel stood opposite Victoria. Ready? She asked. Always. She smiled. This time I'm winning. We'll see. The game began. Victoria played aggressively. Daniel played carefully. Neither gave the other an easy shot. Eventually, only one important ball remained. Victoria had the perfect angle. She looked at Daniel. Remember the bet? I haven't forgotten. She smiled. If I sink this, you owe me a kiss. Then sink it. Victoria bent over the table. She carefully lined up the cue. Then she struck. The ball rolled forward. It touched the cushion, changed direction, and dropped straight into the pocket. Victoria slowly stood. She looked at Daniel. I won. Daniel smiled. You did. She walked closer. So? Daniel laughed. You've been waiting for this all week. Maybe. She stopped only a short distance away. Daniel looked into her eyes. You could have just asked. Victoria's confident smile softened. I wanted to earn it. Daniel leaned closer. But before they could kiss, Victoria's phone suddenly rang. She sighed. Of course. She answered. Victoria Hayes. Her expression changed within seconds. Daniel immediately noticed. What happened? Victoria ended the call. The investors just suspended our expansion deal. Daniel frowned. Why? Someone sent them documents claiming our company falsified financial results. Daniel's expression became serious. Are the documents real? No. Then someone wants to destroy the company. Victoria nodded. And whoever did it had access to private information. Daniel looked at her. Then we'll find out who. Victoria stared at him. You'll help me? Daniel nodded. I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone. Victoria looked surprised. Not because he offered to help, but because she realized she trusted him. And then Daniel noticed something on the table. A document Victoria had received from the investors. He picked it up. His face suddenly changed. Victoria noticed. What is it? Daniel looked at the document again. I've seen this handwriting before. Where? Daniel slowly looked at her. On a letter my father received years ago. Victoria's expression froze. Your father? Daniel nodded. He worked for a company connected to yours. Victoria stared at him. My company? Daniel looked toward the London skyline. I think this story started long before either of us knew. Neither of them realized it yet. The pool game had been nothing more than a playful challenge. But that single document was about to connect Daniel's family, Victoria's company, and a decision made more than 15 years earlier. And the biggest surprise was still waiting for them. The penthouse became unusually quiet. Victoria stood beside the pool table, staring at the document Daniel had just picked up. You said your father worked for a company connected to mine, she said. Daniel nodded. His name was Michael Carter. Victoria's expression changed. Michael Carter? You know him? Victoria looked at the document again. I know the name. Daniel waited. Victoria walked toward her desk and opened an old company archive on her laptop. After several searches, she found a scanned report. She turned the screen toward Daniel. His eyes widened. It was a photograph of his father. Michael Carter stood beside a much younger version of Victoria's father. Daniel stared at the picture. Where did you get this? It was part of an old corporate investigation. What investigation? Victoria hesitated. Financial misconduct. Daniel's jaw tightened. My father was accused of stealing money. Victoria nodded slowly. But the case was never proven. Daniel looked surprised. Never? No. Then why did he lose his job? Victoria looked at him. Because the company board believed he was responsible. Daniel lowered his eyes. His father had spent years insisting he had been blamed for something he didn't do. But Daniel had never known the full story. Victoria sat down. There's something else. She opened another file. This report was sealed. Daniel looked at the screen. Why? Because someone on the board ordered it. Who? Victoria looked uncomfortable. My father... Daniel stepped back. Your father destroyed my dad's career? I don't know if he did. But you think he might have? Victoria nodded. Yes. Daniel turned away. He had spent years believing his father had simply made a mistake. Now everything felt different. Victoria stood. Daniel, I didn't know. I know. You don't have to believe me. I do. She looked surprised. Why? Because if you want to protect your family, you wouldn't have shown me this. Victoria looked down. Maybe that's why I couldn't ignore it. Daniel studied her face. For the first time, he saw something behind the powerful CEO. She wasn't just ambitious. She was carrying the weight of a family name she hadn't chosen. They spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing old records. Every document raised another question. Michael Carter had reported unusual payments. Several days later, he was removed from the project. Then the records disappeared. Daniel rubbed his forehead. My father was right. Victoria nodded. It looks that way. But who changed records? I don't know. Daniel pointed toward the screen. Someone benefited from making him look guilty. Victoria looked at the financial report. Then she noticed a name. Charles Bennett. Daniel frowned. Who is he? One of the company's former directors. Is he still involved? Victoria shook her head. He retired years ago. Where is he now? Victoria searched his name. Her expression changed. London. Daniel looked at her. Convenient. Very. The next morning, Victoria arranged a meeting with Charles Bennett. They met at a private business club in central London. The afternoon was bright and busy. Charles was an older man with silver hair and a calm expression. He looked at Daniel. Then he looked at Victoria. I wonder when this would happen. Victoria frowned. When what would happen? When Michael Carter's son would come looking for answers. Daniel sat forward. You knew my father. Charles nodded. He was one of the most honest men I've ever met. Daniel's expression tightened. Then why was he blamed? Charles sighed. Because he found something he wasn't supposed to find. Victoria leaned forward. What did he find? Charles looked around the room. Payments being made through a private account. Whose account? Charles hesitated. Your father's. Victoria froze. Daniel looked at her. My father's. Not personally. Charles shook his head. It was an account controlled by someone using your father's authorization. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Who had access? Charles looked directly at her. 3 people. Daniel asked, who? Charles counted them. Michael Carter. Your father? And me? Victoria stared at him. You're saying one of us could have done it? Charles shook his head. No. He looked toward Daniel. Someone else had access to all 3 authorizations. Daniel frowned. Who? Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase. He removed an old envelope. This was given to me 15 years ago. He placed it on the table. Victoria opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Daniel recognized the handwriting immediately. My father... Charles nodded. He wrote it the day before he was dismissed. Daniel read the first few lines. His breathing slowed. The letter said Michael had discovered someone inside the company was moving money through false accounts. But there was another detail. The person responsible wasn't stealing for themselves. They were paying off someone outside the company. Daniel looked up. Who? Charles shook his head. I never found out. Victoria looked frustrated. Then why keep this for 15 years? Charles looked at her. Because I was afraid. Daniel stared at him. Afraid of whom? Charles looked directly at Victoria. Your father? Victoria's face fell. Outside the club, Daniel walked silently beside Victoria. She didn't say anything. Finally, Daniel stopped. You don't have to apologize for your father's actions. Victoria looked at him. But I want to. You didn't do it. That doesn't make it easier. Daniel smiled faintly. My father always told me not to judge people for things they inherited. Victoria looked surprised. He sounded like a good man. He was. They continued walking. Then Victoria said quietly, Daniel, yes. If we discover my father was responsible. She paused. I'll tell the truth. Daniel looked at her. Even if it destroys your company? Even if it destroys my reputation. Daniel smiled. That's why I trust you. Victoria looked at him. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Then Daniel's phone rang. It was Emily. He answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Victoria smiled. Daniel listened. Yes, I'll pick you up. He ended the call. I need to go. Victoria nodded. Of course. Daniel started walking. Victoria followed him. Where are you going? To get Emily. I'll come with you. Daniel looked surprised. You don't have to. I know. She smiled. I want to. When they arrived at Emily's school, the little girl ran toward Daniel. Dad. Daniel crouched and hugged her. Then Emily noticed Victoria. She looked curious. Who's she? Daniel smiled. This is Victoria. Emily studied her carefully. Are you Dad's boss? Victoria smiled. Yes. Emily looked at Daniel. Is she nice? Daniel laughed. Sometimes. Victoria pretended to look offended. Excuse me? Emily giggled. Then she reached into her school bag. Dad, I made something for you. She handed him a small drawing. It showed Daniel standing beside a woman. Above them was a bright yellow sun. Daniel smiled. Who's this? Emily pointed at the woman. That's Victoria. Victoria's eyes widened. Me? Emily nodded. Your dad's friend. Daniel looked at Victoria. Victoria smiled. That's very sweet. Emily looked between them. Are you going to marry Dad? Daniel nearly dropped the drawing. Victoria laughed. Emily. The little girl giggled. I was just asking. Daniel shook his head. Kids ask dangerous questions. Victoria smiled at him. Maybe she's smarter than both of us. Later that afternoon, Victoria returned to the penthouse. Daniel was still at work. She opened the old company archive again. Something was bothering her. She reviewed the financial records. Then she noticed a date. A transaction had been approved 15 years ago. The approval signature belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to have access. Victoria zoomed in. Her face went pale. It wasn't her father. It wasn't Michael Carter. And it wasn't Charles Bennett. It was someone who still worked for the company. Someone Victoria trusted completely. Her phone rang. Daniel's name appeared. She answered. Daniel. His voice sounded serious. Victoria, I found something. What? I checked my father's old records. And there was one person he mentioned repeatedly. Who? Daniel paused, then said, Your father's personal assistant. Victoria froze. Her eyes returned to the transaction. The same assistant had signed the suspicious document, but there was one problem. He had died 10 years ago. Victoria slowly whispered, Daniel. What? I think we're looking at the wrong person. Why? Because whoever did this may not have been working alone. Daniel became silent. Victoria looked at the old document. There may have been someone above him. And you know who? Victoria swallowed. I have a name. Daniel waited. Victoria finally said it. Someone who is still alive. The mystery had just become much bigger. And before the day was over, Daniel would discover that his father's biggest enemy might have been connected to the one person Victoria trusted more than anyone else. Her own family. The afternoon sun was still shining over London when Daniel returned to Victoria's penthouse. Victoria was standing beside the glass windows. She looked serious. Daniel walked toward her. You said you found a name. Victoria turned. I did. Who? She handed him a folder. Daniel opened it. His expression changed. The name on the first page belonged to Richard Hayes, Victoria's older brother. Daniel looked up. Your brother? Victoria nodded. Richard was involved with the company 15 years ago. I thought he left. He did. When? 3 months after my father removed Michael Carter from the company. Daniel slowly closed the folder. So your brother disappeared from the business right after my father was blamed? Yes. Where is he now? Victoria looked toward the city. He's one of the investors who is trying to cancel my expansion. Daniel stared at her. Your own brother? Victoria nodded. That's what I can't understand. Daniel opened the folder again. The documents showed that Richard had secretly purchased shares in several companies connected to Victoria's competitors. He had also recently contacted the same investors who were threatening Victoria's business. Daniel looked at Victoria. He's trying to take control. I think so. But why involve our old records? Because if he can make me look financially dishonest, the company value will collapse. Daniel understood immediately. Then he buys the company cheaply. Victoria nodded. Exactly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Daniel noticed another document. What's this? Victoria looked down. It was an old letter from Michael Carter. Daniel read it carefully. His father's final sentence stopped him. The person responsible isn't the one who benefits from the money. It's the person who benefits when everyone blames me. Daniel looked at Victoria. Your father knew. Victoria's eyes filled with emotion. My father knew who did it. Then why didn't he expose Richard? I don't know. Daniel closed the folder. We need to find out. That afternoon, Victoria arranged a meeting with Richard. They met in a bright conference room overlooking London. Richard entered wearing an expensive navy suit. He looked completely relaxed. Victoria. She didn't smile. Richard. His eyes moved toward Daniel. And you must be Michael Carter's son. Daniel nodded. Richard smiled. Your father was an interesting man. Daniel's expression hardened. Don't talk about him like you knew him. I knew him very well. Victoria placed the documents on the table. We know about the old accounts. Richard sat down. I don't know what you're talking about. Daniel pushed a copy toward him. This signature. Richard glanced at it. Then he smiled. Old paperwork. You were involved. Richard leaned back. Prove it. Victoria stared at him. Why are you trying to destroy my company? Richard's smile disappeared. Because you never deserved it. Victoria froze. Daniel looked at him. What does that mean? Richard stood. Father chose you. Victoria's voice became quiet. Chose me for what? Everything. He pointed toward the company documents. The company, the penthouse, the board, the reputation. Richard's voice became bitter. I was the son who spent years building relationships, but father gave everything to his youngest child. Victoria shook her head. That doesn't justify what you did. Richard laughed. You still don't understand. He walked toward the window. I didn't create the original scandal. Daniel looked surprised. What? Richard turned around. Your father discovered it. Victoria frowned. Then who created it? Richard's expression changed. Someone much closer to your family. The room became silent. Daniel looked at Victoria. She slowly shook her head. Who? Richard smiled. Your father? Victoria's face went pale. Daniel immediately stepped closer to her. That's a lie. Richard shook his head. No. He placed another document on the table. Your father wasn't trying to protect the company. Victoria picked it up. She read the document. Her hands started shaking. The document showed that Victoria's father had authorized the suspicious transfers. Daniel stared at it. Then why blame my father? Richard looked at him. Because your father was the only person who could expose him. Victoria whispered, My father framed Michael. Richard nodded. But I didn't know the entire truth back then. Daniel frowned. What happened? Richard took a deep breath. Michael discovered that our father was moving money into a private foundation. Victoria looked confused. Why? Because he was secretly funding medical treatment for employees' families. Daniel looked surprised. That's not theft. No. Richard shook his head, but the money was transferred illegally. Victoria stared at the documents. Her father had broken financial rules to help people who couldn't afford medical treatment. He was going to return every penny, Richard continued. But before he could, the board discovered the transfers. Daniel asked, "So why was my father blamed?" Richard looked down. "Because father was terrified of losing the company." Victoria closed her eyes. Her entire understanding of her father was changing. "He sacrificed Michael to save his reputation," she whispered. Richard nodded. "And I spent 15 years believing father had given you everything because he loved you more." Daniel looked at Richard. "So why are you attacking Victoria now?" Richard's expression softened. "Because I blamed the wrong person." Victoria looked at him. "You tried to destroy everything I built." "I know." "Why?" "Because I thought you knew." Victoria shook her head. "I didn't." Richard looked away. "I know that now." The next morning, Victoria called an emergency board meeting. Every major investor attended. Daniel stood beside her. Victoria walked to the front of the room. "I have something to tell you." The room became silent. She explained the old financial transfers. She explained Michael Carter's innocence. And she explained how her father had hidden the truth. No one spoke. Then one investor asked, "Why are you telling us this?" Victoria looked directly at them. "Because protecting my reputation is less important than telling the truth." Daniel smiled quietly. That was the moment he realized Victoria had changed. She wasn't trying to become the perfect CEO anymore. She was trying to become an honest one. The investors eventually agreed to continue the expansion. But there was one condition. Victoria had to restructure the company. She accepted. Richard also agreed to return his shares to the company rather than use them to take control. The old scandal was finally exposed. Michael Carter's name was cleared. Daniel received a formal letter from the company. His father's record had been officially corrected. Daniel read it in silence. Victoria stood beside him. "How do you feel?" He smiled. "Like my dad finally got the apology he deserved." Victoria reached for his hand. Daniel looked at her. She didn't say anything. She simply held it. A few weeks later, the penthouse pool table was waiting for them again. Daniel stood beside it. Victoria walked in carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "You know," Daniel said, "we never finished our original bet." Victoria smiled. "I remember." She picked up the cue. "One final game." Daniel laughed. "You're still trying to win that kiss?" Victoria looked at him. "This time, I'm not making a bet." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because I don't want to win a kiss." She stepped closer. "I want you to give me one, because you want to." Daniel smiled. "That's a much better deal." Victoria placed a cue on the table. Then she looked toward the windows. The afternoon sun illuminated the entire room. No business meeting. No investors. No family secrets. Just the 2 of them. Daniel walked closer. "You know, Victoria." "Yes." "You were terrible at pool." She laughed. "I won. Once. That's enough." Daniel smiled. "What about Emily?" Victoria's expression softened. "I adore her. And she likes you." "I know." Daniel nodded. "Then I suppose that's important." Victoria looked into his eyes. "Very." Daniel reached for her hand. Then he kissed her. It wasn't part of a bet. It wasn't a business negotiation. It was simply 2 people choosing each other. Months later, Victoria's company announced its biggest expansion in years. But she made one decision that surprised everyone. She refused to put her name alone on the new foundation. Instead, she named it after Michael Carter. The foundation provided education and emergency support to families of employees. Daniel helped manage it. Victoria continued running the company. And Emily became a regular visitor to the penthouse. She especially loved the pool table. One afternoon, she stood beside it and looked at Victoria. "Can I play?" Victoria smiled. "Of course." Emily picked up a tiny cue. Daniel laughed. "She's going to beat you." Victoria looked offended. "Not a chance." Emily placed the cue ball down. "I have a deal." Victoria laughed. "What kind of deal?" Emily smiled. If I sink this, Dad has to buy me ice cream. Daniel shook his head. Who taught you to negotiate? Emily pointed at Victoria. Her. Everyone laughed. Victoria looked at Daniel. He smiled back. The woman who had once challenged him to a pool game for a kiss had become something far more important. She had become part of his family. And Daniel had become the person who reminded Victoria that winning wasn't always about money, power, or business. Sometimes the greatest victory was finding someone who believed in you when the entire world was asking you to prove yourself. Their story had started with a simple pool game, a playful challenge, a ridiculous bet. But in the end, the kiss wasn't the most important thing Victoria won that afternoon. She won trust. Daniel won justice for his father. Emily gained someone she could call family. And together, they built a future neither of them had expected. The pool table remained in the penthouse. And every time Victoria challenged Daniel to another game, he reminded her of the same thing. If I win, you owe me a kiss. Victoria would always smile. Deal. Because some games were worth playing forever.